Thanks very much. Good afternoon and happy day before St. Patrick's Day, also known as Budget Day. Most of you heard me talk about the budget before, so I'm not going to say too many things in opening before we get to your questions, but we will remind you that this is what we're calling the America First budget. We had America First, an America First candidate. You now have an America First president, and it shouldn't surprise anybody that we have an America First budget. You've seen the details. As we talked about last week, $54 billion of additional defense spending. We have some more details today on where that money is going. We're seeing increases at the VA, increases within the Department of Justice for law enforcement, increases within the Department of Homeland Security for things that include border security and immigration controls. Increases within the Department of Energy to deal with a nuclear triad, and then corresponding reductions in similar amounts, offsetting dollar for dollar in other programs. The largest reduction, if you've seen the budget already, is a 31% reduction within the Environmental Protection Agency. The next largest reduction on a percentage basis is within Department of State, and the other departments are reduced in lesser amounts. I think the smallest reduction we have is NASA, which is just less than 1%. But there again, as with many of the agencies, you'll see certain line items within those budgets plussed up. This is the message the president wanted to send to the public, to the press, to Capitol Hill. He wants more money for defense, more money for border enforcement, more money for law enforcement generally, more money for the vets, more money for school choice, and then to offset that money with savings elsewhere so that all of that is done without an additional dollar added to the deficit. As I've mentioned before, this budget does not balance the budget. This budget simply reallocates and reprioritizes spending as any family or business would do. This budget does not, for those of you who were not here last week, this budget does not address the big picture items such as policy changes, revenue flows, tax policy, mandatory spending. This is simply the top line spending budget. It's why we call it the budget blueprint and not the full budget. That full budget, which will contain all the rest of those pieces and parts, will be released in May. Before I take questions, I'm going to do something I don't ordinarily do, and I'm sure it's kind of new. I'm going to call on the New York Times because they're in trouble. Apparently, is there where's my New York Times guy? Matt Flagenheimer and Ellen Rappaport, okay, are in big trouble. I'll give you the first question, but you have to deliver this message to them. They printed this morning that I am the father of 17-year-old triplet girls. My 17-year-old daughter really wishes that we're happy, or really wish that had happened, but my two 17-year-old sons are really upset. So if you could clarify that, that would be great, and I'll give you the first question if you've got one. So go ahead.
Okay, well, we're not very good at math, obviously, at the New York Times.
Math is right. It's actually the gender that was wrong.
Well, but, sir, during the campaign, President Trump, then candidate Trump, talked about the national debt, which, of course, has reached around $20 trillion. You mentioned it in your budget message this morning. Is there a plan, as the president talked about during last year's campaign, to actually eliminate the national debt in 8 years? He said during the campaign it would be easy to actually eliminate the entire debt, not the deficit, but the debt in 8 years. Is that something that this president is actually committed to trying to do?
It's a good question. It's a fair question. I would just suggest to you it's not the right time for the question. The budget blueprint, again, does not deal with the debt. It even doesn't even deal with the deficit. It is simply the first part of the appropriations process. We'll send this up to the Hill now, and the appropriations committees of the House and the Senate. Of course, the House controls the power of the purse. The Senate, Congress controls the power of the purse. And this will be the first step in that process. We will start to address the issues of the longer-term deficit, longer-term debt in that larger budget. And of course, we'll have to deal at that time with things like mandatory spending, tax policy, revenue flows to the government. So again, it's a fair question. I just don't think now is the time to ask the question.
Question, the 28% that comes out of the State Department, I know that you're leaving a lot of discretion to the people who are in charge there at all of these agencies for how to implement these cuts, but how much is intended to come out of the foreign aid budget of that $10 billion?
A lot of it. Keep in mind, as I've said before, one of the reasons that you've seen such a dramatic reduction in the State Department on a percentage basis is not that this president thinks that diplomacy is not important. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. We've already seen that Secretary Tillerson has had a tremendous one diplomatic success already on the deal he cut with Iraq. The president believes in diplomacy, and we believe that this budget protects that core function of the State Department. It just so happens that much of the foreign aid that the president talked about in campaign, much of the money that goes to climate research, green energy, those types of things are actually in the State Department budget. If those line items had been in the Department of Commerce, you would see Department of Commerce having gone down by by a similarly large percentage. So the answer to your question is that most of the cuts within the State Department try to focus directly on foreign aid. Yes, sir.